He approached slowly, dropping to one knee, speaking in the soft, low voice he always used with frightened animals. The baby gorilla didn't retreat. Instead, it lurched forward, closing the distance between them. And before David could react, tiny black fingers wrapped around his hand with surprising strength. The contact sent a jolt through him, not fear, but connection. Recognition of trust being offered in a moment of pure desperation. The infant pulled at his hand, tugging with all the force its small body could muster, and when David didn't immediately move, it pulled harder, its cries growing more urgent. The message was unmistakable. "Follow me, please." David's mind raced through possibilities as he allowed himself to be led forward. Where was the mother? Where was the rest of the troop? Baby gorillas this young were never alone. They stayed close to their mothers, clinging to them constantly, protected by the entire family group. For this infant to be out here, alone and terrified, something had gone terribly wrong. He let the baby guide him, its small hand still wrapped tightly around his fingers, pulling him deeper into the forest where the light grew dimmer and the air cooler. They moved through dense vegetation, the baby leading with a determination that seemed impossible for something so small, occasionally looking back as if to make sure the ranger was still following, still willing to help.
Okay, little one.
They descended into a shadowed ravine where moss covered everything and the stones were slick with moisture. The baby's cries had changed now, no longer the panic screams of before, but something more urgent, more focused. And then David saw her. His heart sank. The mother gorilla was wedged between two massive rocks, her enormous body trapped in a crevice that had been wide enough for her to enter, but too narrow for her to escape. She was motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of her chest, her eyes half closed, exhausted beyond measure. David's throat tightened. She must have been foraging, reaching for vegetation deep within the rocks, when she slipped and became trapped. How long had she been here? Hours? All night? The baby pressed itself against David's leg, no longer pulling but simply standing close, trembling. The tiny body shook with exhaustion and fear. But there was something else now too, a quiet trust, as if the infant understood that this human might be its only hope. David knelt slowly, positioning himself so he could see the mother's face more clearly. Her eyes tracked him, aware but wary. Her breathing labored. He spoke softly to her, the same gentle words he'd used with her baby, letting her know he meant no harm. The baby gorilla reached toward its mother, small fingers stretching, but unable to quite touch the massive form trapped just beyond reach. The heartbreak in that gesture nearly undid him. David pulled his radio from his belt and called for backup, explaining the situation with a calmness that belied the emotion churning inside him. While he waited, he assessed the situation, looking for the safest way to free the mother without causing her more distress or injury. The baby never left his side, occasionally looking up at him with those enormous eyes, as if checking to make sure he was still there, still committed to helping. It struck David then, the weight of what had happened here. This infant had been alone with its trapped mother for hours, crying out until its voice was hoarse, refusing to leave her side. And when it heard him on the trail, it had made a choice to trust a stranger, to reach for help even though every instinct should have told it to fear humans. The enormity of that trust settled over him like a physical weight. With help arrived and careful coordination, David worked to shift the rocks, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid any sudden movements that might panic the trapped gorilla or cause the stones to shift dangerously. The baby watched every movement, quiet now, as if understanding that this required patience. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes, the mother gorilla pulled herself free. She collapsed onto the open ground, her massive chest heaving, too exhausted to even rise. But she was free. She was alive. The baby didn't hesitate. It rushed forward, scrambling across the rocky ground, and buried its face into its mother's thick black fur, tiny hands tangling in the coarse hair, holding on as if it would never let go. The mother, weak and drained, slowly lifted one enormous hand and placed it gently on her infant's back, a gesture of reassurance, of love, of connection restored. David stepped back, giving them space, his own eyes burning with emotion he didn't bother to hide. And then the mother did something he would never forget. She turned her head toward him, and with deliberate slowness, reached out her massive hand and touched his arm. Just once, just for a moment. But in that touch was everything. Acknowledgement, gratitude, a recognition that he'd seen her need and answered it. He watched as she slowly rose, the baby clinging to her neck, and began to move back toward the deeper forest. The infant looked back once, its large eyes meeting his, and David felt something in his chest shift and settle into a new shape. They disappeared into the vegetation. The forest swallowed them up as if they had never been there at all. David stood alone in the ravine as the light began to fade, the shadows growing longer around him. The forest returned to its quiet rhythm, birds calling in the distance, wind rustling through leaves. But he was not the same. He had been chosen, trusted in a moment when trust was the only currency that mattered. And that was something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The knowledge that connection transcends species, that compassion has no boundaries, and that sometimes in the wild places of the world, we are given the gift of understanding something greater than ourselves. The forest had never felt so still. Ranger David and Tambo moved along the narrow trail with the practiced ease of someone who had walked these paths 1,000 times before, his boots finding purchase on roots and stones without thought. The canopy above filtered the morning light into soft green patterns that danced across the undergrowth, and somewhere in the distance, a troop of colobus monkeys called to one another in their rhythmic way. It was the kind of morning that made him grateful for this work, for the privilege of being a guardian in a place so ancient and alive. He paused to adjust his radio, checking in with the station, his voice low so as not to disturb the peace. Everything was routine. Everything was as it should be. And then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong, sharp and piercing, cutting through the tranquility like a knife. David's head snapped up, his hand instinctively reaching for the radio at his belt. The sound came again, a desperate scream that sent a chill racing down his spine. It wasn't the call of any bird he knew, nor the alarm of a monkey sensing danger. This was something else entirely, something raw and urgent and wrong. He turned toward the sound, his heart beginning to pound, and without hesitation, he left the trail, pushing through ferns and low branches toward whatever was making that terrible noise. The undergrowth grew thicker as he moved deeper into forest, thorns catching at his uniform, vines tangling around his ankles, but he didn't slow down. That sound, it pulled at something deep inside him, a call that demanded an answer. When he finally broke through into a small clearing, he stopped short, his breath catching in his chest. There, sitting alone on the mossy ground, was a baby gorilla. The infant couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 months old, small and vulnerable, with thick black fur that seemed too large for its tiny frame. But it was the eyes that struck him most, wide and dark and filled with panic, so pure it was almost human. The baby saw him and immediately reached out, both small arms extended, fingers grasping at the air between them. Another scream tore from his throat, desperate and pleading, and David felt his chest tighten with emotion he hadn't expected. He had seen countless animals in distress during his years as a ranger, but something about this moment felt different, more personal somehow.